The revolving doors shut behind me at 10:45 p.m., sealing me inside the lobby like a vault. The chandelier above trembled, glass prisms clinking softly as if in warning. The carpet was thick red, the kind you'd expect in an old Broadway theater, but it muffled nothing. My footsteps echoed upward, bouncing off marble columns, until it felt like someone else was walking beside me. The air was sharp with polish and something sweeter, an old perfume that had long since outstayed its welcome. It didn't smell alive. It smelled rehearsed. Mr. Harlan was waiting behind the front desk, posture straight, jacket pressed, his eyes flicked to the grandfather clock in the corner. Before settling on me, he didn't offer his hand. Instead, he slid a brass key across the counter. "Harlan, night shift starts now, 11 to 7. You check guests in, keep an eye on the desk, rotate through the cameras every 30 minutes. Standard work." The key caught the chandelier's light. For a moment, it glinted wrong, like the metal had been wet. When I blinked, it was just brass again. I reached for it, but Harlan pulled his hand back abruptly, replaced it with another key, identical, except for a faint scratch. "Harlan, this one's yours," almost too quickly. His expression never broke, but his fingers lingered on the key before letting go. "Ethan, I've done night jobs before, shouldn't be a problem." He finally looked me in the eye. "Harlan, the last few receptionists said the same." His tone was flat, neither threat nor comfort. "They didn't last." He tapped the counter once, like a gavel, and disappeared into the side hall. No word of farewell. The lobby felt larger with him gone. I sat at the desk, running a hand over the leather register book. Its cover was scratched deep, like someone had dragged a key across it again and again. The chandelier overhead swayed gently. Though no air moved, I was reaching for the log sheet when I saw movement. In the mirrored wall behind the desk, a figure in a red jacket, standing very still. My heart lurched. I turned around. No one, only the elevator doors, closed tight, the carpet stretching out empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. A voice broke the silence. "Marcus." New blood. He stepped into the edge of the chandelier's light as though it had pulled him out. A man in his 50s, sharp hairline, smile too wide. His name tag was old brass, letters worn but legible. Marcus, concierge. I hadn't been told there'd be a concierge on night duty. He leaned against the desk like he'd been there for hours, fingers idly tapping the wood. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper. Crumpled, soft at the edges, like it had passed through too many hands. "Marcus, these aren't hotel rules. They're survival rules." He pressed the paper into my palm. The touch was clammy, colder than skin should be. I unfolded it. Ink bled faintly through the page. A damp, bitter smell rose off it, cigarettes and mildew. The first line was smudged but readable. Rule 1. Check the security cameras every 15 to 30 minutes. Don't stare. My chest tightened. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if every line was weighing me down before I even read them. Marcus leaned in, his smile flat now. Eyes sunk with something I didn't want to name. "Follow them or you won't last." I tried to laugh. It came out dry. "Ethan? Rules don't scare me," but as I said it, my fingers dug into the paper until the edge tore. No matter how I tried, I couldn't make myself let it go. It felt like the paper had already claimed me. The paper was still in my hand when the grandfather clock struck 11. The sound rattled through the lobby. Dull, heavy, like it belonged to a cathedral. I shoved the rules into my jacket pocket, trying to shake off the unease, then turned my focus to the monitors in the office behind the desk. The room was small, cramped with old screens stacked in pairs, each showing a corner of the hotel. The static hum of the machinery filled the air. My hand hovered over the switcher, flipping through each feed, elevators, hallways, the empty banquet floor. Nothing moved. Then the lobby feed flickered. At first it was just static, snow dancing across the black and white footage. I tapped the monitor, half expecting it to clear. It did. The chandeliers returned. The desk, the polished statues by the entrance, bronze men with spears, frozen mid-step, always facing each other, except one of them wasn't. I leaned closer. The statue on the left, the one I'd walked past not 10 minutes ago, was no longer facing the other. Its head was turned toward the front desk, the blank bronze eyes staring straight into the camera. Straight at me. My mouth went dry. I blinked hard, and for a moment the feed warped. The lobby stretched into strange proportions, carpet rippling like water. When the picture stabilized, the statue's head was forward again, like nothing had changed. The rules echoed in my head. I yanked the paper from my pocket with shaking fingers. The second line, bold and precise despite the smudges. Rule 2. Never look directly at the statues after midnight. If they change position, leave immediately. My stomach clenched. Midnight hadn't passed yet, but the sight was enough to make my pulse hammer. I shoved the paper back into my pocket and forced myself to stand. Ethan, just nerves. My voice sounded thin against the machinery. I grabbed the clipboard and stepped back into the lobby. The air felt heavier now, pressing against my chest with each breath. The statues stood at the far end, flanking the doors like guards. Their bronze surfaces caught the chandelier's glow, reflections of pale gold streaking the walls. I walked slowly, trying not to let my footsteps echo. The closer I got, the stronger the smell of metal became, sharp like old coins, held too long in a sweaty hand. When I reached the doors, both statues were exactly as they should be, spears upright, eyes forward, nothing amiss. I let out a long breath, lips trembling, pressing the clipboard to my chest. A creak echoed behind me. I spun, flashlight already in hand. Nothing but the front desk, the empty red carpet stretching down the hall. The chandelier swayed slightly overhead, glass prisms ringing a soft warning. I turned back. The statue on the left had shifted again. Not on the monitor this time, in front of me. Its entire body angled toward the desk now, away from its twin. The spear raised, just an inch higher. Its bronze eyes caught the chandelier's light, sending a sharp glint directly into mine. Cold sweat slicked my neck. My grip on the clipboard tightened until my knuckles whitened. The rules pulsed in my mind. Leave immediately. But I couldn't move. Not yet. My legs felt rooted to the carpet. A scraping sound dragged across the marble. Low, deliberate, like stone shifting against stone. My breath caught. The statue's hand was no longer on its spear. Bronze fingers extended, pointing down the hall toward the front desk. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the carpet's edge. My heart slammed against my ribs as I bolted toward the desk, refusing to look again. My shoes thudded against the runner, each step pounding in time with my heartbeat. By the time I reached the desk, I was gasping. I dropped the clipboard, pages scattering, slammed open the register book. Anything to keep my hands busy. I dragged my pen down the page so hard, it tore through the paper, deep gouges across the leather beneath. The sound of pen on paper grounded me. The sting of ink smearing my fingers steadied me, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the glass doors. From where I stood, the statues were still, perfectly still. Bronze guardians frozen, as if they'd never moved. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the smell of old metal clung to the back of my throat, like rust. The chandelier swayed again, and for the first time since I'd stepped inside, I realized the air vents were silent. There was no breeze. I pressed my fingers into the register, carving lines until they bled. The statues didn't move again, but I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for midnight. The chandelier had stilled, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced toward the bronze statues, I expected them to have crept another inch closer. I forced my eyes down to the clipboard, pressed the pen against the page until it tore, and muttered to myself, "It's only nerves." But the smell of old metal still clung to my throat when I left the lobby. The hallway stretched out before me, crimson carpet that ate the sound of my shoes. Wall sconces cast weak yellow light, enough to show the door numbers repeating down the corridor. 1010, then 11, 12, then 1012 again. I slowed, squinting at the brass plates. Maybe I'd misread. No, two identical plaques gleamed back at me, both etched with the same numbers. The air here was different, staler. My tie felt too tight. I loosened it as I walked, clipboard clutched like a shield. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the hum of the bulbs. That's when I heard it. A single footstep behind me. I froze mid-stride. The carpet should have smothered the sound, but it hadn't. It was heavy, deliberate. Not mine. I turned my head slightly, listening. Nothing. The corridor lay empty, the sconces burning steady. I forced myself forward, each step measured. Then I heard it again, another footfall, perfectly out of sync with mine. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it followed. Always a beat behind. My throat tightened, sweat prickled my back. I told myself to turn around, to look, but my legs refused. My chest locked, as though my body already knew the rule, before my brain did. I fumbled in my jacket for the paper, pulled it out with trembling hands. The ink was smudged, the fold damp with sweat, but the words were still legible. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't look back. Keep walking. My knees weakened at the sight of it. I gripped the clipboard so tightly the corner dug into my palm. The footsteps continued. Closer, heavier. I tried to quicken my pace, but the carpet seemed thicker, swallowing each stride like mud. My breathing turned shallow, my ears strained for every sound, desperate, terrified, all at once. Another step, right behind me. The air shifted. A smell followed, sweet and suffocating, like perfume sprayed too many times in a closed room. It clung to my tongue. My chest heaved, as though the scent alone was pushing the air from my lungs. I reached the next junction. Nearly collapsed against the wall. My eyes darted to the corner mirror above the sconce, a convex bubble meant for security. My reflection warped in the curve, stretched thin. The hallway behind me was visible, empty, but the sound was still there. Another footfall, this time accompanied by a low breath, hot against the back of my neck. Beat. I lurched forward, half running now. Clipboard rattling in my grip. The doors blurred past, 12, 10, 13, 10, 12 again. Numbers looping, repeating, mocking me. The footsteps matched me, relentless. The perfume thickened until it coated my mouth with bitterness. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was keep moving. Finally, the hallway split. Left led deeper into darkness. Sconces flickering weak, right led back toward the lobby, I thought. I didn't hesitate. I turned right, nearly tripping over the carpet's edge. The footsteps stopped. My lungs burned. The air seemed clearer here, cooler, the smell dissipating. I leaned against the wall, dragging the clipboard down my chest, trying to steady my breathing. For the first time since stepping into the corridor, silence returned. My ears rang with it. I dared to glance at the nearest brass plate. 1012. Again. The sight made my stomach twist. I wanted to tear the number off the wall, to scream at it, but before I could move, I caught something else. A faint smudge on the wallpaper, at shoulder height, 4 parallel lines, shallow but distinct, as though fingernails had scraped down the wall in a desperate grip. I lifted my hand toward it. The grooves were fresh. The air shifted once more, heavy with perfume, and from behind me, closer than ever, another step fell. I pressed my back against the wallpaper, nails digging into the gouges left there, and prayed the footsteps would pass. But they didn't. They only stopped when the breath touched my ear. I kept my eyes forward and swallowed the breath. That wasn't mine. The rule pulsed in my head like a siren. Don't look back. I didn't. I pushed off the wall and walked, then jogged, then ran until the corridor bent toward the elevator lobby. The carpet gave way to cold black tile. My soles hit harder than I meant them to. My finger jabbed the call button until the brass plate rattled. Ding. The doors parted like a mouth. Empty cabin, chrome trim, polished handrail. Mirrored back wall from waist to ceiling. The air inside was colder than the hallway, and it carried the same scent I couldn't shake. Old perfume and metal. Fia. Don't look into elevator mirrors. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. It sat in my pocket like a live wire. I stepped in anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. The doors slid shut with a cushioned thud that I felt in my teeth. I kept my face angled to the panel, pressed lobby. The button lit up a red that looked too wet. I made myself count the breath in my chest. 1, 2. The cable engaged with a low groan. The floor trembled. My gaze stayed on the panel, on the numbers above it. 10, 9, 10, 9. I blinked. The light hummed at a thin insect pitch. The cabin shook again, through the bones, not the feet. I slid my tongue along my teeth and tasted a penny. Don't look into the mirror. I stared at the seam where the door halves met. A thin black line. My peripheral vision kept filling itself with silver. The mirror wanted my eyes. It was like sitting next to a lit phone you promise not to check. The glass behind me breathed the lobby's cold onto my neck. The indicator clicked. 9. Wrong direction. I pressed lobby again. The button dimmed, then brightened as if arguing. At the edge of the panel, in the tiny triangle of chrome where metal met mirror, movement flinched. My pulse jumped. I didn't lift my head. Instead, I let my eyes drift lower to my own shoes in the reflection's bottom sliver. Polished leather, one lace slightly undone. Beside them, no, behind them, another pair of shoes hovered half a step back. Toes not quite touching the mirrored floor. No legs. Just shoes. They didn't cast a reflection of their own. They didn't belong to me. Breath out. I gripped the railing with the hand away from the mirror, palm slipping on the cold. Lobby, I whispered, as if the box could hear. The speaker grill above the panel clicked once, a dry little cough, and went silent. The red jacket in the mirror came first. Not full, a smear of color at shoulder height behind mine. More suggestion than shape, as if someone had dragged a thumb through wet paint. I kept my eyes down. The jacket didn't belong to any guest. The cabin shuddered. 9-9. The indicator stuttered like a broken thought. My reflection did something I couldn't explain. My hands were on the rail, white at the knuckles. In the mirror, my fingers closed a half-second slower, then caught up. It was like watching a delayed feed. The lag opened a crack in my gut. That cold air rushed through. I didn't look up. I couldn't. The mirror didn't need my whole gaze to work on me. In the chrome seam, a chin tipped toward my shoulder, then receded, then tipped again. The air in the cabin got colder, enough to prick the sweat on my neck. The perfume smell changed, turned powdery. Old lady sweet, the kind of sweetness that lives in theater velvet. Don't, I said out loud to my own eyes. Don't look. Something brushed my collar. Not tugging, just the pressure of presence. The handrail vibrated under my palm like a plucked string. The doors stayed shut. The indicator finally jumped. 8. The cabin started to move. Down or up, I couldn't tell. The weight in my knees shifted. The red smear sharpened into a shoulder seam, a collar, brass buttons, the face above it, no face. Just the tilt of a head where a face should be. It angled toward my ear, listening. The speaker grill clicked again, softer, like a tongue behind a closed mouth. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Don't look. The glass made a sound I didn't know mirrors could make. A soft whine, not from the building but from the surface itself, as if it were being stretched. My reflection's tie lay straight and neat against my shirt. I touched my own tie and felt it crooked, bunched. The mirror was wrong. Or I was. The cabin lurched to a stop. The light above the doors flashed a floor I hadn't seen before. B, not basement, just the letter. Glowing red like a wound. The doors cracked open by an inch and held there. Cold air slid in, colder than the cabin. Only darkness beyond the gap. The smell of damp concrete edging out the perfume. Keep going, I said, voice low, as if bargaining with the motor. Lobby. I pressed the button again. The B flickered. In the mirror, the jacket behind me leaned forward. That did it. My eyes snapped up. The cabin was empty. The mirror was not. In it, I watched myself facing the doors, breathing fast, blood bright on my lip. Behind me, a taller version of myself stood too close. Inches from the back of my head, chin tilted to my ear, mouth opening on a word I couldn't hear. Its eyes were closed. Mine were open. We didn't move in sync. When I flinched, it didn't. When it whispered, I didn't hear it with my ears. I felt it bloom as cold inside my skull. The doors slammed. The indicator leapt. 7, 6, 5. The mirror snapped back to real time, like elastic pulled too tight. The jacket smear dissolved. My tie in the reflection jerked crooked to match the one at my throat. Lobby. The word came out raw. Ding. The doors opened onto carpet again. Not tile. Yellow light. Brass numbers. The perfume slid out into the hall and thinned. I stepped out without looking back. Legs rubber. Jaw locked. The doors closed and took the mirror with them. Behind the nearest door, 14, though I didn't trust numbers anymore, a murmur threaded under the frame. 2 voices, caught in a whisper too steady to be human breath. I froze, my ear inches from the wood, and the whisper leaned closer. The hallway spat me out, like I didn't belong in it. My legs trembled as I stepped off the black tiles and back onto the red carpet. The elevator doors shut behind me with a metallic sigh, sealing the mirror away. But the whisper from its glass still itched at my ear. I forced myself forward. Clipboard under my arm, pen still smudged with ink. I wanted the desk, the register book, anything to anchor me. But the corridor bent left before the lobby. The sconces flickered weak, shadows swaying across the brass door numbers. That's when I heard them, muffled voices behind a door. Low, conspiratorial, like guests speaking in secret. I froze, hand halfway to my tie. Rule number 5 echoed in my skull. If you hear voices from empty rooms, don't stop, don't listen, keep moving. My mouth went dry. The sound wasn't distant. It pressed against the thin wood of 1016, right beside me. I held my breath. Male and female, overlapping, murmuring faster than normal conversation. Too steady, no breaks for air. I pressed the clipboard to my chest and forced a step forward. The voices sharpened, as though they'd moved closer to the door with me. I stopped again. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, syncing with the sconce's hum. Keep moving, I whispered. But my legs locked. The voices rose, no words I could make out, just syllables piling over each other, layered like a chant. I took another step, then another. The further I moved, the louder they became, until I could hear them behind both doors. 1016, 1017, 1018, like the walls themselves were breathing. The air thickened with it. My head buzzed, my vision swam. Something rolled out from the dark end of the corridor, a red ball, smooth and glossy, bouncing softly as if nudged by an unseen hand. It rolled against the grain of the carpet, uphill against the natural slope, until it bumped against my shoe. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. Then I heard laughter, high-pitched, childlike. But it didn't come from the hallway, it came from the ceiling. The broken speaker grill above me rattled with it, the sound stuttering like a corrupted tape. The laughter skipped, rewound, replayed, louder each time, until it warped into something metallic. I clamped my hands over my ears. The clipboard clattered to the carpet. Stop, I hissed. But the sound bent higher, laughter twisting into shrieks, cutting at my skull like a drill. The ball rocked once at my feet, then settled still. The doors down the corridor began to rattle, one after another, brass knobs trembling, frames shaking, as if something inside each room slammed against them in unison. The voices behind the wood didn't stop. They rose in pitch, blending into the shrieking from the ceiling until I couldn't tell one from the other. I dropped to one knee, palms pressed against the carpet, trying to anchor myself. The fibers scratched my skin. My head swam. I thought I tasted sugar on my tongue, sharp and artificial, like carnival candy melting too fast. The sweetness made me gag. The chandelier at the hall's far end swayed, prisms clinking, scattering fractured light across the walls. Every door vibrated now, numbers shaking loose on their screws. I snatched the rules from my pocket with trembling hands. The paper was damp, almost hot, letters bleeding further. I fixed my eyes on Rule 5 and forced myself to stand. My knees screamed, but I staggered forward, one step, two. The laughter hitched, the shrieking paused, then silence. The doors went still, the chandelier steadied, the sugar-sweet taste faded. I stood there panting, clutching the crumpled rules in both hands. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. The ball was gone. I bent down, hands trembling, scooped up the clipboard. The pen had cracked against the carpet, ink smeared across the page like dried blood. I backed toward the lobby, every instinct screaming not to turn my back on the doors. My throat was raw from holding in a scream. Just before I reached the corner, the speaker above me crackled once more. Not laughter this time. A single word, in a child's voice, stretched long and warped. Stay. The word sank into my spine. I stumbled into the lobby, eyes flicking up to the clock. The hands pointed to 11:30 p.m. Still hours left, and the hotel wasn't done with me. Stay. The word lingered in my ears long after the speaker went silent. It vibrated inside my skull like a nail tapped into bone. I stumbled back into the lobby. The grandfather clock stood frozen at 11:30 p.m., not ticking, not moving. Its silence was worse than any chime. The chandelier above the lobby swayed again, glass prisms rattling. This time the vents hissed out warm air, no wind, no draft, just the chandelier moving on its own. Like a pendulum keeping time I couldn't hear. Then the laughter started. It seeped through the speaker grills in the ceiling one by one, rippling outward from the lobby into the halls. A child's giggle, bright, high. For a heartbeat, it almost sounded normal, almost human. Then it glitched. The giggle skipped like a scratched record. A syllable looped, warped, rewound into itself, until it grated down into static. The laugh bent lower, slower. A throatier sound that no child could make. My spine tightened. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound pressed through my palms. It wasn't just audio anymore. It was in the floor, vibrating the red carpet beneath my shoes. I glanced toward the left hall. A suitcase sat at the far end, upright. Leather cracked and straps loose. I hadn't seen it before. No guest had passed me to leave it. It just was. The suitcase tipped, fell on its side, then it began to roll. Not down the incline, not with gravity. It rolled toward me, uphill, leather scraping against the carpet, handle dragging. The laughter rose with it, synced with the sound of the case thumping over seams in the floor. I backed up to the reception desk, clipboard pressed against my chest like armor. My breath came fast, shallow. The case stopped mid-hallway, still upright, as if waiting. The laughter pitched higher, sharper. It cut into a scream, not a human scream. Not raw or broken, but sharp, exact, like a fire alarm in the shape of a voice. The chandelier clanged against its chain. The clock's glass pane cracked down the middle with a sharp snap. I dropped the clipboard. The pen rolled across the marble floor. I pressed both palms against my ears again, hard enough that my jaw ached, but the sound drilled through bone. It wasn't only the scream. Beneath it, another layer hummed, like chanting, like the voices from the doors before. Louder now, harmonized with the scream. I bent forward, gagging. A taste filled my mouth, sharp, sweet, artificial, like powdered candy poured straight onto my tongue, the kind that burns if you swallow too much. My saliva turned syrupy. I spat onto the marble, pink foam. "Stop," I gasped. "Please, stop." The suitcase jolted. Its latch sprang open with a metallic pop. The lid creaked back. The case was empty, nothing inside but shadows. Still, it rocked, as though something inside was laughing with the speakers. I stumbled backward until my calves struck the reception desk. My knees buckled. I clutched the edge hard. Nails scraping wood, carving shallow crescents. The scream cut out. The chandelier stopped dead. The suitcase snapped shut on its own. Silence. My chest heaved, sweat cooling fast against my skin. I bent to snatch the rules list from where it had fallen with the clipboard. The paper was damp again, as though it had been submerged and pulled out dripping. Ink bled along the fold. Rule 6. If you hear laughter on the floor, do not follow it. Do not respond. Leave immediately. I gripped it until the paper tore in my fist. My lungs strained to drag in the lobby's still air. Then I heard it again. Not from the speakers, not from the case, from the hallway itself. Soft, high-pitched, a giggle bubbling up from the carpet like water from a hidden spring. I turned slowly. The corridor stretched dark, lined with brass numbers, every door closed, handles still. But the laughter rolled along the carpet toward me, as if the floor itself were carrying it. I grabbed the desk phone, receiver heavy in my hand. The line was dead, no dial tone, just a faint static hiss echoing the giggle. My vision blurred. My throat burned from sugar-sweet acid. I slammed the receiver down, every nerve telling me to run. The laughter bloomed into a chorus, bouncing between the walls, climbing into a shriek again. The clock in the lobby jolted forward. Its hands skipped, from 11:30 straight to 2:15. The sudden leap in time punched through me, harder than the scream had. My watch still read 11:32. The hotel's clock said 2:15 a.m., and I remembered the next rule. The grandfather clock's hands spun, like they'd broken free of their gears. Seconds vanished in a blur of brass, minutes dissolving into hours. My stomach dropped as I watched it stutter forward, catch, then whirl again, like a film reel burning in the projector. When it stopped, the hands pointed at 2:15, but my watch still said 11:32. I pressed my back against the reception desk, clutching the torn rules list. My pulse thundered. I blinked hard, half expecting the vision to reset, but the grandfather clock's face stayed frozen at 2:15. The chandeliers were still now, crystal shards hanging motionless, too still, like time in the lobby wasn't just jumping, it was fractured. Rule number 7 crawled up in my head, not read, but remembered. If the lobby clock shows a different time than your watch, run to the office, lock the door, wait. I didn't hesitate. My shoes slapped against marble as I bolted down the side hall. Every step sounded wrong. The lobby echoed, a beat too late, as though my footsteps were being played back from a recording. The sound lagged, always half a second behind me. The closer I got to the office, the heavier the air became. A low hum filled the corridor, not from the lights, from the walls themselves. The wallpaper trembled faintly, brass sconces vibrating in rhythm with the hum. I twisted the key into the lock, shoved inside, slammed the door closed. The bolts scraped across metal with a shriek that felt too loud. Silence then. The office smelled of stale paper dust. Old ledgers stacked high on the shelves. I dropped into the chair behind the desk, chest heaving, rules list clutched so tight my knuckles ached. The wall clock ticked steadily. 11:34. I checked my watch. 11:34. Normal. But the grandfather clock in the lobby? I could still see its reflection in the narrow window of the office door. Stuck at 2:15. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating the rule under my breath. Stay here. Wait. Don't trust the lobby. The fluorescent light above flickered once, buzzing like a trapped fly. When I opened my eyes, the office clock had changed. 3:40. My watch still read 11:35. The second hand on the office clock twitched. Forward. Back. Then leaped ahead 5 seconds at once. My throat tightened. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard, the wood creaked. The rules list slipped from my hand, fluttered onto the blotter. Ink bled from the letters, as though the paper itself were sweating. Rule number 7 blurred. But I didn't need to read it again. A thud echoed from the lobby. I froze. Another thud. Heavy. Rhythmic. The chandelier chains rattled. The clock's hands scraped, grinding like metal teeth forced backward. I risked a glance at the monitor. Security feeds, flickering, lines of static crawling. The lobby feed stuttered. The grandfather clock's hands spun backward now, fast enough to blur. Then they stopped. At midnight, just before the feed cut out. My chest tightened until it hurt. I dug nails into my thigh to stay awake. A ding broke the silence. Elevator. The sound rang sharp through the walls, impossibly loud. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the monitor. The lobby feed flickered back. The elevator doors were open. Cabin lit white, empty. But the digital floor counter above the doors jumped numbers. 3, 7, 12, B, 599. Nonsensical. Too fast to be real. I pressed my hand over my mouth, teeth grinding. The ding came again and again. Elevator stopping at every floor. That didn't exist. Then the camera caught it, a shape inside the cabin. Not a person. Not exactly. It was a shadow without a body, smeared against the walls like wet paint. Its head turned, slowly, until the dark pit where its face should be, angled directly toward the camera. The screen went black. The ding sounded once more, this time outside the office door. The ding outside my door wasn't loud, but it cut straight through bone. I kept my hand on the bolt, didn't move. Rule 10. If the elevator moves on its own, stay out. Watch it on the cameras. The words weren't on the page anymore. They were just there, like a reflex. I lowered the shade on the office door's tiny window, turned to the monitor stack. The feeds stuttered in gray snow, then found themselves. Lobby, empty desk, chandelier still, grandfather clock frozen. At a time I refused to read. Hallway outside the office, the elevator doors stood closed, a sliver of chrome gleaming like a blade. Another ding. The door slid apart. The cabin was lit the way morgues are lit in photographs. Too white, no warmth. The mirrored back wall stretched the space longer than it should, edges bowing slightly, like the glass was under pressure. The smell reached me through nothing. Metal, damp, faint as mold, but I tasted it anyway. The way you taste cold air. The floor counter clicked once, then lost its mind. B2, 19, B, not spinning, flickering through impossibilities. A gust of colder air breathed under my door, carrying the damp of concrete. The penny taste slid back onto my tongue. I leaned in until my forehead almost touched the monitor glass. Don't leave the office. Don't go look. I hooked a finger under the stapler on the desk, closed it on my palm. The sting steadied me. A bead of blood rose, bright, honest. The cabin looked empty, and that was worse, because I'd learned empty never means safe. I switched to the fisheye lens inside the elevator. Slight warp. The mirror reflected the empty threshold, and beyond it, the hallway where my closed office door waited. Except the depth was wrong. The cabin stretched too far, and the floor in the reflection shone wet. A thin film, like water. The overhead speaker in my ceiling crackled, a dry cough, then silence. Stay put, I whispered. Just watch. The handrail inside the cabin vibrated, a faint quiver in polished metal. The light dimmed, then brightened too far, bleaching edges. A shadow poured in. Not cast, not thrown, but seeping, like spilled ink climbing the wall. It thickened at the corner where wall met mirror, until it remembered how to be tall, too tall for the cabin. Its head was absence, A hole the light couldn't cross. No feet. No shadows. The mirror showed it standing there and not standing there at the same time. I swallowed hard. The sound thundered inside my skull. The shape turned, not like a person. Head pivoted, shoulders caught up, then the rest followed. The pit angled toward the camera. Static crawled down the feed, thin ribs distorting the chandelier beside it. The counter ticked backward through nonsense. B9333. The stapler bit deeper into my palm. I welcomed the pain. In the mirror, color bled into the white, a smear of red, brass glint, lapels, buttons, then gone again as if wiped with a wet sleeve. Marcus, I breathed. The elevator speaker grill clicked, not in the audio feed but in the picture. I watched it vibrate above the panel. The shadow lifted an arm, no hand, not really, but something like it pressed into the lens from inside the image. The feed warped, edges bending like teeth on glass. I flipped cameras. Hallway, cabin, hallway again. No safe angle, nowhere to look. The doors tried to close, stalled, then opened wider than they should, metal flexing with a noise that buzzed in my molars. The counter froze. Letter B. The cold under my door deepened. My breath plumed in a room without winter. Lobby, I whispered, like a prayer. The counter didn't change. The shadow tilted its head, listening. For a heartbeat, the mirror betrayed it. The cabin behind the shape showed not the hall, not my door, but the concierge desk. A bell that hadn't been rung. Marcus's red jacket just at the edge of frame. A brass name tag, letters rearranging, unreadable. Then the feed tore itself back. Hallway again. The shadow stepped, no sound, but the picture sagged under it. Straight lines bowed like strained wire. Every monitor flashed, not white. Silver, a color that ate the room. Then black. The office light hummed alive. My eyes adjusted too slow. The only sound, the motor cycling through floors that don't exist. And then, out in the lobby where no guest stood, the concierge bell rang. A single clean note. Again and again. The concierge bell's last chime hadn't finished fading when the grandfather clock in the lobby struck 4. The sound didn't ring like a clock. It cracked. Sharp, brittle, like glass under strain. My watch read 12:02. The office air grew heavy, damp, metallic, like radiator pipes that hadn't run in years. I pulled the rules list closer. Blood smeared across the page as I wiped my palm. The stapler wound throbbed, hot, clean, a reminder that I was still here. The first knock came soft, a polite guest's knock. 3 taps. I froze. The bolt trembled. Dust sifted from the frame. Then his voice. "Ethan, it's Marcus. Open up." I shut my eyes, whispered Rule 8 into my fist. Never open the office door, no matter who knocks. The cameras glowed faint on the shelf. I forced myself to look. Hallway feed empty. No one at the door, just the shadow of the doormat. Stretched far too long, crawling across the carpet like spilled ink. The knock came again, harder now. Metal in it. The brass handle twisted. The door shook once, then held. "Ethan, let me in." His tone was lower this time, almost a growl. Each syllable dragged across gravel. Shh. I clutched the desk edge until the wood creaked. My breathing rattled. The rule pounded in my skull. Do not open. Do not answer. The monitor blinked. Marcus stood in the hallway feed, facing the camera. But his uniform was wrong. Lapels smeared. Brass buttons drifting like oil spots. His smile bent wider than the frame could hold. My throat locked. I couldn't swallow. "Open the door," he said again. But his mouth moved out of sync with the sound. The voice came late, warped, like a broken recording. The feed tore, horizontal lines crawling down the screen. Marcus leaned closer, until the lens warped, his face too close, too wide. The brass tag on his jacket bled into illegible shapes. I grabbed the logbook with shaking hands, scrawled Rule 8 across the page, again and again, until the pen tore through the paper. Ink bled across my fingers. Shh. The knock escalated. Not fists now. Palms, slamming in rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact rattled the fluorescent tube overhead, the office light strobing, sick white. I pressed my bleeding hand against the desk to anchor myself. My heartbeat raced with the pounding. Then, silence. I didn't trust it. The cameras flickered back. Hallway, empty again. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My lungs ached. Another knock. This one came from behind me. I spun. The office walls shook. Plaster and filing cabinets groaning, as though someone was pounding from the other side. A muffled voice seeped through, wet, blurred. "Ethan, open the door." There was no door on that side. The lights dimmed. The hum faltered. My reflection surfaced faintly in the dark monitor glass. My own eyes stared back, ringed, hollow, and behind me in the reflection Marcus, standing just over my shoulder, head bowed, mouth moving. I whirled, chair scraping tile, empty. The air smelled of copper, sharp, raw. The office door shook again, harder this time. The bolt whined. The rules list fluttered as a draft swept through, though no vent was open. I slammed my palm flat over the page, shouted until my voice cracked. Rule 8. Do not open. Do not open. The cameras bled into static. Only the lobby feed returned, grainy, half dead. Marcus filled the frame again, his face glitched, eyes wide, grin splitting ear to ear until skin tore. He raised a hand, pressed it against the camera lens from his side. The screen bulged, glass flexing. Then he dissolved, like smoke pulled backward through a vent. Silence. The filing cabinet clock clicked, 4:05. My watch, 12:07. I hunched over the rules, whispering them like prayer, blood soaking the page until it tore. From the other side of the office door, a whisper, sharp, right against the keyhole. Next time, you won't wait. The whisper through the keyhole hadn't stopped echoing when the next sound came. Crying. Not the warped recordings I'd heard through the ceilings, not the laughter dragged through broken speakers. This was wet, human, sharp with breath. A woman, muffled, like she had buried her face in her hands. It seeped from the hallway feed, faint at first, then bled into the office itself. A sob catching on the plaster walls, vibrating through the filing cabinets. I wiped ink and blood off my palm, clawed for the rules list. Rule 9 burned back at me in smudged handwriting. Never open if you hear crying. The office air pressed tighter. I forced myself to the cameras. Hallway feed, empty carpet patterned with repeating diamonds. But the audio, ragged sobs, stuttering, right there. I checked the lobby feed. Nothing. Elevator idle. Back to hallway. The sound grew louder, pinned to one door down the hall. Room 1204. The brass number plate shook with each sob. The doorknob rattled, not from inside, but with the weight of the sound itself. I whispered, "No, no," and gripped the logbook. Still, my hand reached for the ring of master keys on the desk. Cold, heavy, real. I told myself if someone was hurt, maybe I had to. That if I didn't check, someone could die. That if I didn't check, I'd be guilty. The rules fluttered on the desk in a draft. My own scrawl glared at me. Don't open. I clutched the keys harder. The crying rose. It was no longer a woman. It fractured, broke down into layers. A child, then a man, then static, then back to the woman. As if the sound itself was being recycled through throats that didn't exist. I stumbled to the hallway monitor. My throat ached like I'd been the one sobbing. Then I saw it for. Light under the door. Not warm, not a lamp's glow. Cold, sterile, like floodlights pressed flat to the carpet. Shadows broke the glow, shifting shapes moving across the bottom edge. I leaned closer. My breath fogged the monitor. Something bent down. A shape, pale, long-limbed, folding itself into the crack under the door. Fingers slid into view first, thin, white, jointed wrong. They pressed flat against the carpet from inside the room. Then more followed, an arm, a head, but faceless. It crawled slow, without pushing the door open, as though the wall itself let it through. The crying stopped. The silence was worse. The thing rose to stand. The shape was wrong, blurred. A woman's dress with no features above the collar. The sockets were black, not hollow, packed with something deeper than dark. She, or it, turned into the camera. My breath froze, her head tilted, the sockets aligned with the lens, and though the camera had no mic feed, I heard it clearly. Inside the office, against my ear, hot and close, open. The keys clattered out of my hand. I staggered back against the desk, knocked the stapler to the floor. My knee hit wood hard enough to bruise. I didn't care. I snatched the rules list, pressed it to my chest like armor. The feed cut. Black screen. But the crying resumed. Not from the hall this time, from the office wall. The plaster behind my chair. Low, steady, pulling air through wet lungs. I slammed my palms over my ears, but it was inside. Vibrating bone. My own ribs shaking with each sob. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, louder, higher, until it sounded like weeping glass. I shouted until my throat tore. Rule 9, I'm not opening. I'm not opening. The crying rose to a shriek, then snapped off, gone. The clock above the filing cabinet ticked once. The hands both pointed down, 6 o'clock, flat, but my watch read 4:42. On the hallway feed, room 1204's door was ajar now, wide enough to show blackness inside, and the camera microphone hissed with a whisper too faint to mistake. Still waiting. The whisper from room 1204 hadn't faded when the building shifted again. The feed cut to black. The office fluorescent buzzed, a manic wasp trapped in glass. Then, knock. Not the polite rhythm of Marcus, not the sobbing plea of the woman. This was bone against wood. Flat, deliberate, each strike rattling the bolt in its socket. I knew the rules. I mouthed them without sound. My lips were cracked, tongue bitter with iron. The strike came again, stronger. The wood flexed inward. Dust sifted down from the frame. I staggered to the desk, gripped the rules list. The paper was soft with sweat, corners eaten by my nails. Blood from my palm smeared Rule 8, Rule 9 into a blur. But Rule 11 stared up, merciless. Never leave before your shift ends. I pressed the list flat against the wood, like it could hold the door. The knock shifted to pounding, no rhythm, just violence. Each hit struck my sternum through the air. The chandelier in the lobby feed swayed like a pendulum, scattering fractured light across the black and white screen. I dropped the rules list, snatched the stapler. I dug it into my forearm, once, twice, until skin split. Pain sharpened me. I wrote with that blood. Rule 11, Rule 11, Rule 11, across the logbook, across the desk, onto my own sleeve. The pounding grew frantic, a storm of fists, claws, furniture I couldn't tell. The frame shook, splinters snowed. I backed against the filing cabinet. Every drawer trembled open an inch. Paper spilled in shivers. The fluorescent screamed, a frequency that made my molars ache. On the monitor, the lobby clock spun wild, hands whipping like blades, shattering into fragments, then reforming, then spinning again. But the clock above the cabinet in here, dead still. Both hands nailed at 6. My watch said 5:43. The seconds didn't move. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then a new sound, a drag. Soft. Like skin along wood. Something traced the office door, paused by the handle. The bolt jiggled once, slow, twice, harder. Then the voice. Not Marcus. Not the crying woman. A new one, low, genderless, metallic, like the chandelier chains turned to syllables. Leave early. The words curdled in the air. I shook my head until my neck popped, slammed the bloody logbook shut. My throat ripped as I screamed back. Shift ends at 6 o'clock. I stay until 6. The chandelier tore from its mount on the feed, glass exploding in the lobby. The camera cracked, static pouring like snow. In the office, the fluorescent burst with a pop. Darkness. Only the hum of the exit sign. The pounding returned. Not fists now, but hammers, axes, an army outside the door. The cabinet toppled, papers fanned in the air like white moths. I hit the floor, curled over the rules list, pressed it to my chest, my face like scripture. My pulse counted each second, but the watch needle never moved. 5:59. Forever 5:59. The pounding hit crescendo. The frame split. My ear rang with the scream of nails ripping out. The wall itself cracked, like plaster ribs. I screamed Rule 11, over and over. Words broke into sobs, but I kept chanting. The syllables running together, never shiftin', never leave early, never leave early, never. Then silence. The watch ticked. The pounding stopped mid-blow. The office was dust and broken drawers. I was on the floor, blood soaking my sleeve, mouth open like a broken radio. And from the other side of the door came a calm, clipped voice, unbothered, precise. Shifts over. The bolt slid back on its own. The office door eased open an inch, light spilling in from the lobby. My body wouldn't move, but my eyes fixed on the gap. Something pale stood waiting in the frame. The bolt slid back on its own, and the door eased open an inch. Light spilled through the crack, thin, yellow, dust bright in it. Something pale withdrew from the gap, as if it had been pressed there. 4 long joints bending the wrong way, a hand flattening into the jamb, then vanishing, like water soaking into wood. Then, a shoe stepped into view, polished, black, ordinary. "Shift's over," Harlan said, his voice even. "No hurry, no concern." He pushed the door open with 2 fingers. Thus looked me over like a manager checking linen. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and mint. Behind him, the lobby looked real. Real in a way it hadn't all night. The chandelier lay in a glittering crater on the marble. Prisms scattered like ice. The grandfather clock face cracked down the center. Both hands fixed at 6:01. Morning light bled in through the revolving doors. Weak, paper thin. "Rough night?" he asked. I stood on shaking legs. Blood had dried tacky on my sleeve. The rules list clung to my palm, warm and damp, like a living thing that didn't want to be put down. Something like that. Harlan's eyes flicked to the office wreckage. Drawers tipped, papers everywhere. A fluorescent tube shattered into sugar-fine dust. He didn't ask. He didn't touch anything. He only straightened a pen that didn't need straightening. "You're off at 6. It's 6. He checked his wristwatch. "Just past." The word past felt obscene. I followed him out. Glass crunched under our shoes, soft enough to hear, not soft enough to ignore. The air smelled like hot dust and wet brass. Somewhere in the ducts, a fan ticked as it cooled. At the desk, I placed the master keys on the marble. My fingers left rust-colored crescents where they'd gripped the edge all night. I kept the rules list pinched in my other hand without meaning to. "Harlan," I said. My voice rasped. "Who's on nights with me, besides you?" "No one," he said. "The concierge," I said. "Red jacket, brass buttons. Marcus." His face didn't change. "We don't keep a concierge on nights." "You used to." It wasn't a question. The name tasted wrong in my mouth, like I was mispronouncing something no one had said out loud in years. He considered me the way people consider broken clocks. You can stare all you want. It won't fix the hands. "We haven't had a concierge here after hours since before I started. Day staff only." "How long?" He cut me off gently, with a tilt of his head. "If there was someone with you, he wasn't ours." The lobby hummed to life around us. Automatic doors cycling once, a vacuum starting far away on an upper floor. The morning manager's playlist stuttering on the PA, then cutting off. Normal noises, the kind of normal that tastes fake after what you've heard in the dark. "Keep the shirt," Harlan said, glancing at the blood. "Throw it out when you get home." "I'm not coming back," I said. I assumed. He reached for the keys, didn't touch the paper in my hand. "Do you want your application file, or should we shred it?" "Shred it," he nodded. "No sorry to lose you, no 2 weeks notice. Just the crisp mechanics of closing a drawer. Corporate mercy." I turned toward the revolving doors. The glass pushed cool against my palms. The world outside looked washed and thin. The way city mornings do after an all-night storm. I made it 3 steps, and then the elevator dinged behind me. It was a small sound, clean, familiar. I didn't stop. I didn't have to. Reflex made me glance left. The door stood open. A bright, empty cabin. The counter above them held steady. Lobby. My eyes snagged on the mirror anyway. Old habit I hadn't broken fast enough. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. Marcus stood just over my shoulder, only in the glass. Red lapel crisp. Brass tag polished to a word I couldn't read. He moved like a man trying not to startle a bird. His hand reached toward my reflected jacket. I felt nothing on my real side. In the mirror, he slid the folded paper into my pocket, patted it twice. Light and friendly. I looked down. My pocket lay flat. My hand held the list. When I looked back at the mirror, he was gone. The cabin remained. Empty metal. Quiet light. The faint breath of cold from the shaft. The counter flickered once, for a heartbeat showed a letter instead of a number. B, then snapped back to lobby like it hadn't misbehaved at all. "Ethan?" Harlan said behind me, mild as weather. "You okay?" "Fine," I said, and my voice wasn't mine. I slid the list into my pocket anyway. I don't know why. Maybe because for a second I felt its weight in there, the way the mirror said I should. Maybe because part of me already knew weight and truth don't have to agree. Outside, the street was awake but not alive. A trash truck braked hard at the curb. A jogger's breath smoked the air. A bakery 2 doors down vented sweet yeast into the cold. The hotel's revolving door side closed behind me. I waited for the city to feel like a cure. It didn't. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The reflection in the brass trim of the door gave me enough. A smear of red at shoulder height inside the lobby. A glint of brass that meant letters I couldn't read. A sheet of paper where it shouldn't be. I walked until the building shrank between traffic lights. The rules warmed against my thigh. I told myself I'd throw them out when I got home. I told myself a lot of things. Some places should be left alone. This hotel is one of them.